And when you read Stephen's speech, every single word of it pertains to something that you would think, oh, it's just like reading a narrative. Oh, it's just like this happy story, when every word that Stephen says is so important to something else in the Bible that people may have misconstrued in the Old Testament times. Anyway, just so you know that, it's a good study, it's a fun study, and there are no contradictions, there's no errors in the Word of God. The error comes when we read something and don't think it through. And so when people say, well, of course they were 400 years in the Bible. It says it right there in the book of Genesis. It's because they didn't go on and read the rest of it. Okay? So, just understand that. And we don't know exactly how long. We can go with the Septuagint or whatever it is. Josephus, it says, is 215 years. But it's approximately that time frame. All right? And we know that just based on the age of the people, what it says. But the terminology, just because it seems clear, doesn't mean it is. As a matter of fact, if you read it again a second time, it's no longer so clear anymore. Now you have to do the rest of the Bible. Let the Bible interpret the Bible, okay? So, sorry to spend so much time on that, but just so you know that for...
Actually, if you really look at that sentence, proper pronunciation would be ahead of the who.
Right.
I mean, because the who lived in Egypt just explains the children of Israel.
Right.
And so it could actually...
But you don't do that the first time you read it. You just read it and you say, and then you go to the account when they leave in the Exodus and it says they were 430 years there. And you think, well, then they must have been 430 years in Egypt. Never says that. But we always insert what we believe or what we think we understand, and that's it. That's what we believe. And that's why I like to get these little details out of the way, is because if we do, other things will clear up elsewhere. But if you get these type of things wrong, then something else somewhere else will be wrong. Because the time of Solomon's temple was built, it says 480 years after a certain occurrence. I think it was after the Exodus. So you add these times up, and that's how we can tell the proper dating for things. But you've probably heard people say, well, Moses could have left in 1450 AD or BC or 1350. They're not really sure. It's because they don't look at the details in the Bible. The Bible is very, very accurate. Okay, so anyway, just so you understand that. Okay, then we go on, and it says here in verse 16, we're going to finish with the second half of verse 16 because it's a very important doctrine about God. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites, the people dwelling in Canaan, is not yet complete. And I kind of touched on this in Sunday school yesterday, is that the shedding of blood, if I kill somebody, whose life is forfeit? Mine. It says that and I don't have this written down the exact verse, and it's just a love bug. And I don't have the exact verse, but, and I'm going to misquote what it says, but it says, the person that sheds another person's blood, his life is forfeit. And the land, the sin of that cannot be atoned for except by the blood of the person who shed it. Okay? In other words, if I kill somebody and they don't take my life, then there is guilt upon the land itself. And remember, I brought this up in Sunday school yesterday. When we abort children...
Context for our whole country.
That's right. When we abort children, those are human beings that are being killed. And there is a blood guilt upon the land. And imagine 50 million children being killed. I don't care what anybody says. If they don't like to talk about abortion, it is an absolute doctrine that is taught in the Bible that human life begins at conception. And I've proved that on several levels. But here we do that. And then another thing that we do, not just abortion, another thing that we do is that when somebody kills somebody, we say, well, we don't want to give them the death penalty. And we try to get rid of the death penalty. Now, here's what happened just a couple weeks ago. On Saturday morning, Tom and I go down to Newtown. And yeah, we go down to Newtown and we work in the projects. And the first road that Tom and I walk on is where that guy shot those two British people. So it was all blocked off, and we actually had to ask permission to go under the tape to deliver food to some people. Okay? That road. Now, it was a 16-year-old boy, and he shot these people in premeditated murder. Okay? And I was talking to somebody. I was floored. This was a Christian, and I believe it was a Christian. I was talking to somebody about it just a couple days ago, and they said, well, I said, we need to take him out. We need to have him executed. We need to do that because that's what the Bible calls for. And they said, don't you want to know why he did it? And they started to say, well, maybe he had mental trouble. The Bible does not give an allowance for mental distress. It doesn't give an allowance for extenuating circumstances. When somebody kills somebody in the Bible, it doesn't give any reason why it's justified. All it gives is that that person's life is forfeit. Now, it does say if it was an accident. I'm talking about premeditated murder. If it's an accident, it does give circumstances for that. But when somebody takes somebody's life in the Bible, it doesn't say, well, he was underage, or he was this, or he was that, or one thing or another, or he grew up in the projects and he didn't know right from wrong. It doesn't give any of that. It just simply says that person's life is forfeit, and the justice was immediate. It wasn't appeal after appeal after appeal, and 50 years later they think about maybe doing it, and then they pass a law that says no more death penalty. It's nothing like that. It is immediate, and it is final. God is the final arbiter. What's that?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Now, you've got me into thinking, okay, everything in the New Testament, everything in the Old Testament's been replaced by the New.
Right.
Except for the Sabbath, and so that means we don't have to do it on the Sabbath. Now, what about that? That's part of the law.
Shall not murder.
Right.
Right.
So why then do we go back to the Old Testament when it comes to murder?
Because the New Testament says, thou shalt not murder. We're not to murder. Now, King David committed murder, and they didn't execute him. Right? So we're making exceptions. And there are times in the Old Testament where people are murdered. I'm talking about the act of murder and the judgment for it. I'm not talking about the exceptions that don't say why or,
I'm not talking about the exceptions either.
Right.
I'm talking about the act of murder and the judgment for it.
Right. Because
Look
man is...
Look at the lady the lady that they wanted to stone because
For adultery.
For adultery. And
Right.
he said, let he who is without sin cast the first
Well,
stone.
what's the difference between adultery and murder?
In God's eyes, probably not much.
A great deal, because man is created in God's image. When you destroy God's image bearer, your life is forfeit. That's why that is the way it is. So the Old Testament and the New will bear out that we are made in God's image. James 3, I believe, speaks in that. So it is...
I still don't see why we go back.
Well, that's not going back. That's just simply setting the precedent. Right, but that is simply setting the precedent that we are created in God's image, and when we commit murder, we forfeit our life. And it doesn't go. Oh, the verse that I said is the one that this isn't part of the law. This is part of God's nature. It says that the guilt of killing somebody, the land, the cannot be atoned for except by the blood of the one who shed it.
The whole world is under condemnation.
That's right. That is because that is from his very nature. And that goes to what it's saying right here. This verse says that the sins of the Amorite have not reached their fullness yet. God is saying that sins heap up to a point where all of a sudden judgment must come. And that is with Israel. They went through years and years and years of not doing what, then they were exiled. And then they went through more years of it, and then they rejected Christ and they were exiled. The whole world is going to go through the Great Tribulation because sin is being accumulated and we're not dealing with it according to God's nature. And when he says that, and like I said, I'm misquoting that verse and it's in Numbers, I don't have it right in front of me, but it says that the guilt of blood cannot be atoned for except by the blood of the one who shed. That doesn't mean that person isn't saved. I could go ballistic and pull out a gun and shoot somebody. My life is forfeit. That doesn't mean I'm not saved, but it means that I have taken a person's life, and that is contrary to God's very nature. That's not the law in itself. That is God's nature. Do you see the difference? The law is saying, we can't fulfill this, and so we need to come to Christ. But even after coming to Christ, if I kill a person, I may be saved, but I have forfeit my own life. If they don't do that, then that sin is being heaped up in the nation in which it's in. There's a difference. When you violate God's very nature, there's a difference than what's being given in the law. Christ fulfilled the law on our behalf. We can't fulfill that law. But there are punishments that need to be meted out. When you don't... when you violate the tenets of the church, there's discipline to expel the person from the church. The guy in Corinthians, he says, expel him from him. Let him be handed over to Satan, that his flesh may be destroyed, but his soul saved on the day of Christ, or spirit saved on the day of Christ Jesus, right? There is punishment that needs to be meted out for sin. Just because the Old Testament is obsolete in Christ doesn't mean that we aren't bound under rules of governing our actions. Okay, and that's why almost every society on earth starts out with the death penalty, is because they understand it is part of God's nature that we are made in God's image. What happens is, as societies get more affluent and they start reasoning things out, why should we kill this person? He didn't know what he was doing. It doesn't allow that. Our consciences don't allow that. We have to sear our consciences away from what is known. Romans 1. We can know these things intuitively, that it is wrong to kill and that the person's life is forfeit. We know it. It's the society developing away from that, pushing God out of the picture that takes that out of our hearts. I'm certain of that. And when he says that these sins are heaped up, it's because this is God's nature that's being violated.
But actually, every sin is against God.
Well, yes, it is. That's true.
Sin itself is...
That's right, but not every sin attacks the image of God. Okay, that one personally does. We are made in God's image. Like I said, that's confirmed in the New Testament that we bear God's image and we are responsible for our actions when we kill another person. I am absolutely certain that's not reintroducing love. Right.
I want to be able to argue with grace on the one hand and this on the other hand.
Right.
I want to be able to argue with it if I
And,
have to.
King David did get God's grace. And here's another thing. How many people did David kill in war? We don't know how many. Thousands, thousands, and thousands. And he was responsible for more with his underlings, right? He killed 200 people. 200 Philistines took their foreskins as a bride price for, what's her name, Michal, the daughter of Saul, right? Okay. Did God rebuke him for any of those?
No.
Which one did he get rebuked for?
Uriah.
For Uriah the Hittite. That's right. So you see the difference? One is, these are
reason he killed him?
Killed who? Uriah? Yeah, because he wanted to sleep with his wife. And he got her pregnant.
He killed all.
Well, yeah.
He got her
But he got... He
got
what?
her pregnant already.
Right.
But what's the difference between that and killing in war? Killing all this.
Because it was an act of war. They were enemies of the people of God.
I was going to
They were-
say,
oh,
they
they're
were supposed to have
enemies.
been...
Right. The Philistines were the enemies of the people of God.
Something personal, sir.
That's right. Now, God did say to David, you will not build the temple for me, which I think you were going to bring up, because you have shed much blood. Because you started to say it and then we kept going on that. But there is a difference. But the fact that he had shed that blood and God wanted a man of peace to build his temple. But the image of God being destroyed without justification. And the very fact that they destroyed their enemies and there was no penalty for it tells you that there is justification for capital punishment. To kill the enemies of God or the people that are doing things. So anyway, this is the point I'm making at, is that verse 16 there is an important verse to look at and to understand how merciful God is, that he allowed them to make their own graves for 400 more years before destroying them. And finally, there was no remedy. He gave them 400 years to seek him out. And they didn't do it. They saw the miracle of the Exodus. They saw the miracle of the people being sustained in the wilderness. They knew that this had happened. How do we know that they knew that it had happened? Those things had actually happened. How do we know that the people in the land of Canaan knew that God was protecting his people and that he had delivered them through the Red Sea?
Well, they even remember some of that. They recounted in the Bible.
But I'm talking about the people living in the land of Canaan. How did they know? How do we know that they knew? The internet, that's right. Because what did Rahab the harlot say?
Oh,
She recited what they had done. So they knew, they were without excuse, knowing that there is a God, that he is delivering these people, and that we should check this out for ourselves. She did, and she is listed in Hebrews 11 as one of the righteous, right? So we know that they knew. God was merciful to them for those 400 years, and he gave them a chance, and they did not respond to his calling. Just like when, I said this in a sermon one time, is the people of the time of Jonah, when he went up to the Ninevites and they repented, put on sackcloth and ashes, right? Extra biblical history says that for a couple hundred years they actually turned to monotheism. And eventually they turned away from that. And they came against the people of God. Sennacherib, king of Assyria in 722 AD, and God destroyed 185,000 of them in a single night, saying, you are coming against the people of God.